If you wanted to challenge an empire in the 20th century, you built an army. If you wanted to challenge it in the 21st century, you build reserves. Because power no longer lives in battleships, it lives in balance sheets. If you walked into a bank in 1945, you would not have seen soldiers. You would not have seen flags. You would have seen paper, green paper. And inside that paper was power. The world had just survived World War II. Europe was rubble. Japan was ashes. Britain was bankrupt. Factories were flattened. Currencies were unstable. Trade had frozen. Confidence was dead. But one nation stood untouched. Its factories were running. Its farmland was intact. Its navy ruled the oceans. And inside its vaults sat nearly two-thirds of the world as gold. America did not just win the war. It inherited the system. In July 1944, before the war even ended, 44 nations gathered at a quiet mountain resort in New Hampshire. The location was the grand old Mount Washington Hotel. They did not come with weapons. They came with calculators. This meeting would become known as the Bretton Woods Conference. Their mission was simple: design a new global financial order. The old one had collapsed during the Great Depression. Currencies had spiraled. Banks had failed. Trade wars had deepened the crisis. So the question was asked, what should anchor the world economy? An old silver basket of currencies? The answer changed history. They chose the dollar, not because it was perfect, but because it was backed by something no one else had: gold, $35 for 1 ounce. Every other currency would be tied to the dollar, and the dollar would be tied to gold. Elegant, simple, revolutionary. For the first time in history, one nation's currency became everyone's foundation. If you wanted to rebuild your country, you borrowed dollars. If you wanted to buy oil, you needed dollars. If you wanted stability, you held dollars in your reserves. America did not just export machinery, it exported money. And money is influence. At first, it worked. Europe rebuilt. Japan industrialized. Global trade exploded. The dollar became trust. But trust is fragile. By the 1960s, America was spending heavily. War abroad. Social programs at home. More dollars were flowing overseas than gold existed in American vaults. Foreign governments noticed. France, under Charles de Gaulle, began demanding gold in exchange for its dollars. Ships crossed the Atlantic carrying bullion back to Europe. The foundation was shaking. Then in 1971, President Richard Nixon made a decision that changed everything. He closed the gold window. The dollar would no longer be convertible to gold. Just like that, the world entered a new era. Paper was no longer backed by metal. It was backed by belief, and the system survived. Because by then, the world had no alternative. Oil was priced in dollars. Shipping was priced in dollars. Global reserves were held in dollars. The dollar had become oxygen, and cutting it off would suffocate everyone. Fast forward to the 1990s. China was not yet powerful. It was labeled a developing nation. Cheap labor, export factories, low wages. But while the world saw sweatshops, Beijing saw leverage. Every toy sold in America. Every television shipped to Europe. Every smartphone assembled in Shenzhen. They were paid in dollars, and instead of spending those dollars, China saved them. Relentlessly. By the early 2000s, China held hundreds of billions in United States Treasury bonds, then trillions. This was not accidental. It was strategic. Because when you own another nation's debt, you gain influence. China had become America's banker, but something deeper was happening. A global system required dollars to function. Oil was priced in dollars. Commodities were priced in dollars. Energy demand reinforced utter dominance, and access to the dollar system and meant compliance. This became clear in the 2010s, when countries like Iran and Russia were cut off from dollar clearing systems. Their economies froze. Sanctions were no longer trade penalties. They were financial weapons, and China was watching closely. If the dollar system could isolate others, it could isolate China too. So Beijing began building alternatives, quietly, methodically, currency swap agreements with dozens of countries, allowing trade in yuan instead of dollars. Then the Belt and Road Initiative, financing ports, railways, highways across Asia, Africa, and Europe. Not just infrastructure, financial influence, loans denominated in Chinese currency, debt payable to Beijing. Next came a parallel payment system, an alternative to SWIFE, small at first, but symbolic, and then gold. While headlines focused on trade wars and technology, China was buying gold, increasing reserves, encouraging domestic production, reducing exposure to United States debt. Because gold is neutral, gold cannot be sanctioned, gold cannot be printed. It answers to no capital. Meanwhile, after the financial crisis of 2008, trillions of dollars were created. After the pandemic, even more. To Washington, this was stimulus. To Beijing, it was vulnerability. Because the more dollars exist, the more attractive alternatives become. Then came energy. All settled in yuan. Russia shifting trade eastward. Saudi Arabia discussing non-dollar settlements. Small moves. Historic. For decades, the petrodollar reinforced American dominance. Now, cracks were forming. Here is the paradox. China cannot dump the dollar. It still holds massive reserves. Doing so would hurt itself. America cannot weaponize the dollar too aggressively. It risks accelerating alternatives. So both sides are locked in a delicate dance, interdependent, suspicious, competitive. The world calls it a trade war, but underneath, it is a currency war, a struggle over who defines value, who controls liquidity, who writes the rules. Because the reserve currency is not just about economics. It is about power projection. If your currency is global, you borrow cheaply, sanction freely, influence quietly. Right now, the dollar still dominates. But dominance is not permanence. Spain once controlled global silver. Britain once ruled with the pound. Each empire believed its system was permanent, until it was not. Empires rarely collapse overnight. They erode, slowly, quietly, until one day, the world simply chooses differently. China does not need to defeat America militarily. It only needs to create an option. And once an option exists, monopoly ends. The question is not whether the dollar disappears tomorrow. It will not. The question is whether the world of 2045 looks like 1945. Because somewhere in Beijing tonight, planners are asking a single question. When the shift comes, will we be ready? The next global conflict may not explode. It may rebalance, and when it does, it will not be declared with gunfire. It will be declared with settlement, in a currency that is not the dollar.